Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Good day, everyone. It's the weekend, and of course, that means it's time for episode 28 of The Rewind. On this show, we talk a whole lot of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the MMORPG currently in development by Visionary Realms. And this show is not just about the game, though. It's also about putting the spotlight on the community that's just as excited to play the game as we are. So every week, we feature any community discussions and commentary that we can find to bring people together. If you're new to the show, welcome. And whether you're watching the premiere on YouTube or you're downloading it through iTunes or Spotify or one of our other podcast platforms, we always love any feedback or ratings or reviews you can provide. But I digress. We have a lot to talk about in this one, and it wouldn't be a rewind without my awesome co-host and my brother from another mother, Minus. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I've suffered a gaming injury, however.
I heard about this.
Yeah, it's your fault. I'm blaming you. I'm playing Hades nonstop because you convinced me that this game was good and I should buy it. And it is easily the game of the year for me. I don't think there's anything even close to game of the year as this is for me. And maybe even game of the last few years. I love it. I have to ice my thumb. I literally have to ice my thumb. It's swollen. It's legit swollen. But it's
don't
such
sue
a good
me,
game.
man.
No, you're good.
Yeah. You take my advice at your own risk, but man, it is such a good game. I know it's addictive, and I know it brings me so much joy that you're enjoying it so much. It's got its hooks so deep into your gaming psyche that you are having a hard time breaking free and injuring yourself. That brings me a lot of joy. So.
What does it say though when you injure yourself playing a game? But I will say this though, jokes aside, like I always loved Bastion. I've made that comment quite a bit. You know that. Yeah. And it's been a long time since I played Bastion, but I think that Hades might be better than Bastion. I'm not sure yet, but I think that this may be my favorite game they've put out. So we'll have to see how it continues on.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that too. I'm pretty close to it being my favorite Supergiant game. Yep.
All right, well, that's it from me. Are you ready to get going? We got a lot to talk about. We're going to be digging into this whole show is actually going to be about the newsletter. We're going to look at it from a community perspective, and then we're going to look at it from our perspective. It's a really deep dive. I hope you're ready for this.
Yeah, I've put a lot of work into this. This was a deep dive for sure. So let's get going.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes.
All right, everybody. So typically here we would recap social media for Visionary Realms, but this whole section is going to be basically centered around this developer update, so to speak, from Ben Dean in a form of a newsletter. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about each of the sections of it. We're actually going to read over the newsletter. For those of you that haven't heard it, we're going to read over sections and then talk about it. So again, a considerable amount of time is going to go into this because we just think it's a very important newsletter, which takes some giant leaps forward in communication with the community, as well as clarifies some of the cloudy path that we took here to get to PA5. The letter is broken into sections, and we're going to read those sections and then take some of them some time, I guess, to break it down. After that, we're going to continue into the community section, but it's going to be focused around the community's response to this letter to see if it sort of aligns with what Theric and I are saying. We're not going to be taking any of the Twitter questions this week, and we're really not even going to jump into any of the Pantheon.plus content updates because that's really how important we think this letter is. So we really hope you'll enjoy such a deep dive into a newsletter. So please give us your thoughts and feedback, and we're curious to see what you guys have to say during the live premiere as well. So get that chat rock and roll and let us know how you feel. So anything before we go into this that you want to add about this letter before we get into the deep dive, or do you think we're ready to go?
No, I'm so glad that they released this. That this gives us a real meaty content to sort of dig into. And I'm very excited about this conversation. And I want to hear what people are going to say about it. So let's do this. Okay.
So the first section of the newsletter I'm going to read here is called The Beginning. And again, I'm reading and I'll tell you when I stop. So it says, since the official Pantheon Rise of the Fallen website was erected in the spring of 2014, the project has been nearly completely driven by crowdfunding. Back in those days, it was a lot of sweat and tears. The crowdfunding, which was very much appreciated, kept the lights on, but it was a passion project for the team. That is to say that most weren't taking a paycheck at all. It was a time of pure, raw dedication to launch a classically spirited yet modern MMORPG. Staff and community were united to form the early concepts, toss around ideas, and start putting pen to paper. In fact, nearly the whole staff came directly from the community, and this was one of Brad McQuaid's many strengths, finding talent within the community. And as the stages in this early process formed, the word spread. The community rallied and grew. The excitement grew along with it. Crowdfunding picked up, and some particularly excited people began making investments into the company and into the game. Staff began receiving a very modest pay and actually enabled more people to join the team. Pantheon was, by all definitions, taking off. Now, over the next while, the game systems and concepts were implemented much through hard coding. This provided content for the community to see via streams, screenshots, and newsletters. 4 pre-alpha phases were held, which gave the community a chance to try out the game early and also provide the team data that can be used to flesh out the concepts, content, and system. This also gave us the chance to spread the word and reach more Pantheon fans to join our community. Crowdfunding remained solid, and a couple more investments were made into the company. So that's the end of this section that was called the beginning. I'm no longer reading it. So I'm going to start with my thoughts here, Theric, and then jump into yours. Okay. So it was a nice brief introduction, and to get to, that meat and potatoes that's going to come in the overall article here. I think it was smart for VR, and specifically Ben, to talk about, how the team, a small scrappy one as we know it, was really doing this as a passion project. I think that even with some funds in and people hired to the team, none of them were making like bank, so to speak, at that stage. And they're still not. And I think that while he talks about the game taking off, that the team is still working from a very deep-rooted passion to get this game done. And funding or not, I don't think that, that part of it changed. I think that that's probably why I'm so personally infatuated with Pantheon's developments and steps forward, is just that, again, that deep-rooted passion that these guys have to get this game out. Now, I've personally been very fortunate to have many conversations with the core chunk of this team, and I can tell you that passion seeps through in those conversations deeply. And it's not always just talking shop. Sometimes it's just talking real life and connecting. I personally would have liked to hear a bit more about the PA sessions, but as we're going to learn later in the letter, an important decision would make a lot of that data, I guess, less important. So why, I guess, over talk about it? The elephant that's in the room, from what I've seen, that people have keyed upon sort of right away in the letter, is that it starts talking a lot about funding. And I'm not going to jump the gun here and get ahead in the letter, because we're going to talk a lot more about that later. But just for this beginning piece of the letter, Theric, what do you have to add about how it started, and how were you feeling as you kind of jumped into this?
I really like, stories that start at the beginning. That sounds kind of stupid to say, but if you don't know where you've been, or you don't know where you're going, it's very hard to paint a picture that people can understand. And that's the vibe I got from this. Pantheon had a really slow start. There's no denying that. Like, the Kickstarter era wasn't an easy one, and it wasn't easy for that team. But like you said, that passion is what kept them going. And I think they learned that there was a real hunger for this kind of game, and being able to see some of the ideas that they put into the early gameplay stuff, which we'll talk about in a sec, about how they did that, got people really excited, but it came at a pretty high cost. And I've mentioned this before, but my personal journey with Pantheon was paying attention initially and then stopping until they got their angel investors sort of hooked up, and there was an announcement and they decided they were going to move forward. They had that solid footing. So that's where I came from. And I'm not the only one who took this approach, I'm sure. And so obviously it was a cost that paid dividends for them, right? And I read this section of the newsletter, and it makes me think, I wonder if that early excitement was a sort of a victim of their own success, if you know what I mean. The community snowballed, and it was at such a rate that maybe it just almost worked too well for them. And
you get a good point.
You get expectations and outcomes that can outpace each other sometimes, right? We all saw what we saw early on, and we were like, wow, we were just, like you said, felt it. And it makes me wonder if they would have done anything differently, looking back in the past. And it's a good sort of food for thought, but we'll move on. And I like especially what they said about Brad having an eye for talent. That really hit a chord with me too. And I think that has absolutely proven itself through what we've seen of the development through this phase in terms of the members on their team. And you said talking to members of the team, I've had a little bit, not nearly as much as you have, but even the ones that I've had the direct contact, you're right. I mean, they're just people. They're human. They're real people, right? Who are loving what they're doing. So I think that comes across.
Yeah, without a doubt. Really good, good points there. So we're going to jump into the next part of the letter, and this was called Project Fairtail. And I'm sure this one is the one most people are like, okay, what's going on here? So again, I'm going to read this direct, and I'll let you know when I stop. So the title of this section is Project Fairtail. It says, as a result of the PA testing and our own list of notes and to-dos, it was very clear that if the game was to ship, we are going to need to get more parties interested, get more investment, and expand upon the team with more talent and skills beyond those of our current roster. By the end of 2018, we began work on Project Fairtail, which was to incorporate all of Pantheon's systems into a playable version of the game. It was an ambitious project for the scrappy few, but it was the next logical step, and we went for it. All of 2019 and much of 2020 were used for Project Fairtail. During that time, it became more and more clear that we had to get out of the old client we were using. We needed to move forward from hard coding, inflexible implementations to more robust and scalable solutions. Otherwise, we would have to need to come back and redo the work again later, something that a small team could not afford. We realized that we should continue with the then current implementation practices. We wouldn't be able to ship this game. And that's a really bold statement. I'm stopping for a second and quoting, but that's a really bold statement. If they had continued with the implementation, they wouldn't be able to ship the game. So again, it's huge, right? We'll get into it. But
it's a real window into the tone of this producer's letter.
Yeah. And sorry for breaking there, guys, but that's just a really important sentence there. So jumping back in, quoting it, it says here, we were backing ourselves into a corner with hard coding. Any changes had to be done by programming. All quests, all encounters, everything was hard coded into the client. Designers couldn't do implementation themselves. If they needed to, they'd have to need a programmer to put it in the game for them. Not to mention the size of the code was enormous. Any new programmers coming in would have a hard time making sense of things or even knowing where to begin. Things had to change. So we stopped hard coding. We took this time to develop the actual foundation and pipelines that we were going to need to ship the game. Systems got torn out, reconstructed into a much more efficient and flexible format. Zones were harvested and replanted in expandable gray box format. Even the content, such as encounters, storylines, and tasks, were recreated in freshly built tools to empower designers. From the early versions, we gained insight as to where these systems needed to go and how they needed to be built. That is what's needed to move forward to get the game built into what could be more rapidly built upon with little wasted effort from the development, and to scale the size of project that Pantheon's meant to be. So the prior versions of the game couldn't do that. It added to the timeline of Project Fairtail, but it was well worth it. This is an architecture that will take us through the launch and allow designers current and future to be able to add content easily, efficiently, and effectively. This will become more and more clear over the next few months as you see more rapid development taking effect. Whew. So I have a lot, Theric, I feel bad. I have a lot to say here.
Yeah, it's okay.
Please jump in if you want. Okay. Cause this is a big one for me, and I want to sort of relate it to everybody in the community to some things, because this is not just a big moment for community members. It's a big moment for me. And there's some realization that this ties into that I think is important. So here we go. So this was the era of development that was much of the community had called the dark era, like where the developer team had kind of put their heads down and really tried to put out an impressionable slice of gameplay to increase their ability to fund the game. Now, while it's talked about here, it shouldn't be news to anyone, as it was stated pretty much in the same way in a piece along the reasoning behind Project Fairtail. They announced that part of it and spoke a lot to that. It's always been known that they needed more artists and visual help to get the game to the finish line, and that this was going to be a stylized piece of the game that would represent the work up to this point and what Pantheon would become. So in my opinion, the whole point of starting Fairtail wasn't something that was murky, even though some of the community still didn't understand the changes from PA4 to Project Fairtail, but it was a big step in getting custom assets. You know, people joke about grass and trees, but yes, grass and trees that are designed stylistically so that Pantheon is its own game, right? Like we saw that being done, and it was very obvious. Well, I use the term very obvious to me. I'm not going to say it was very obvious to everybody, but everything was being designed to have a style. You know, they were using assets before that.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting, because I think that is part of the realization people had, and then when they saw the end result, they were like, wait a minute, this doesn't look anything like what we've previously seen. So why did they throw everything else away? Right. It's just a jarring effect. And it comes from not being in the industry, not being in the design room in the where they're making this. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the next part of this, however, was not obvious and perhaps was the cloudiest part of communication through the Project Fairtail timeline. And also, I think it's what it caused the most frustration among the community. And that was kind of seeing something that didn't align with what they had previously seen. And I think this is where Ben released the most important information out there to everyone in discussing hitting that roadblock, so to speak, with how the game was hard-coded and built. So I want to take a quick aside here and open up a bit, because I want to say that this is a topic where I started to really try to take a step back and understand the community more. And I'm going to get into what I mean by that. But this whole piece of the puzzle before Ben announced anything was actually something that caused me to realize that I can't expect the average fan to dig in for information the way that I do. Like, I spend 40 plus hours a week on Pantheon Plus. Like, that's what I do. And it's obsessive and it's lunatic. I'm a lunatic and I can't expect everyone to be like that. Right. So like, I had a lot of conversations in this dark time. And even when PA5 came out and people were like, what's going on here? I've had a lot of conversations about the April 2019 developer stream in which they like featured Kyle. It was kind of the first time they introduced Kyle to the community, but he had been with the team before introducing him. Now, in this stream, and we'll put the link in the bottom here in the timestamp where he talks about this, but Kyle explained that the netcode needed to be completely separated from the rest of the hard coding and code implementation because of a few reasons. He and Japa actually discussed first that the performance gains for CPU usage and network card workload. And these were obviously vastly important because when you hit max capacity in CPU or network, you can't add more game. Like every animation, every ability, every living thing, moving thing, action in an area would be excess to the boundaries of the CPU and network capabilities. So if the code was peaking, and Ben had kind of hinted here, like the code was massive, right? So if the code was peaking, these resources, it was because it wasn't written well. And the game probably couldn't evolve if you were peaking these again, network and CPU. So this talk, they kind of talk about this in a really roundabout way back in April 2019 in that stream. And I think it's important to put a pin in that as I continue on, because they also talked about not just performance issues, but like huge performance gains. They quoted 30 to 40% performance improvement, and that the CPUs were laughing because the network cards were crushing it. Like they were able to handle everything and more, and the CPU was just sitting there waiting to help. So they also talked about the fact that designers were not able to design directly previously without the help of a programmer. They talked about that in April 2019 on that stream. So this is, a few of the reasons that, one, hard coding requires programmers and designers aren't the same thing, right? Like, and I know that a lot of people know that, but if you had to have two people that do different jobs and work on a single thing because the coding was so intertwined that you couldn't just change something without possibly breaking other things, that's a major problem. So the separation of the netcode allowed a small team to now work on tasks independently, which is a necessity. Their team is too small. Also in this, we're not going into a detail in a matter that would properly explain to the masses, though. Kyle did mention that when he pulled out the netcode, that the underlying code was a mess and most of it was unusable in the state. And this led a lot to the recoding, or the term that was used a lot from the VR team, of refactoring. We hear that all the time from Japa. So
I just want to jump in real quick here. I mean, what you're describing, and what they've described, do you think they were having visions of Vanguard again in their heads? Do you think a lot of that was what was going on was, because Vanguard was such a mess when it launched, and because we've heard Japa talk about it, about how the code for Vanguard was a mess. I think they've said spaghetti code, like, you couldn't do anything because it was so intertwined and such a mess that there was no way to make any changes. So, if I had to guess, if I had to speculate, I'd say that what they were seeing was Vanguard 2.0. Right. Yeah. And it was a bit of a nightmare. And
I've even seen conversations talking about how EverQuest was originally this way and caused a lot, and still to this day causes problems for EverQuest. So getting out from under that's huge, right? So So, but again, taking a breath and getting back to the main point of what I was trying to say, to me, I saw this because I spend so much time analyzing every word. I have conversations in the community and point to this and point to that. I even discussed exactly what I'm saying on the recap show that followed. So like, I'm not just making this up and playing revisionist. You can go watch the Pantheon Plus U where I talked about this. But I started to realize that I can't expect this from a normal Pantheon fan. Like I'm a lunatic. Like I can't expect everybody to be this lunatic level of digging, just to get regular clarification. So it really made me take a step back and try to be a lot more empathetic for the community's frustrations, because information shouldn't be that hard to find. And add to that, how could anyone find the right info if they didn't know exactly where to look for this stream in particular? There's nowhere else to go say, hey, I want to learn about the programming. Well, here, click this link. It'll take you to the video, right?
And beyond that, it's very technical. Like it's very technical, even for somebody who's you grew up with computers and, like you consider yourself a, technical user, but this is next level. Like this is programming stuff that most people don't know anything about. Myself included. So it's a little bit like a foreign language in some ways.
It's just, in this whole thing, like the way that you're perceiving versus me, it's really where I started to realize that while VR was telling us the story sometimes, I'm not saying they told us everything, but while they were telling us the story sometimes, it was either in passing, it was either really cloudy, or it was just lost in the fray. And again, the average supporter or new discoverer, no way they find this information, because there's a difference between telling something and explaining and documenting something. They told us some things, but it wasn't explained and it's not documented, as weird as that sounds. And I just think that, this really, again, made me step back and start to try to understand people's frustrations a bit more and not look at it from the minus perspective, but try to say, okay, well, here's how I know it, but why do I know that way? Right. So just again, it's really a moment of self-reflection that I think has helped me. And now we're seeing, VR do it as well. So last couple of points here, because I'm rambling a ton on this section, but back to the actual letter itself, with all the info that we have from this, as well as Kyle's live stream, I can assume that Project Fairtail was supposed to take everything they built, pretty it up, put a vertical slice in, and things would be great. But, when this came up and really made that dark era much darker, right? They had to start a huge chunk of the game over. Not just for us, but I think it was a dark era for them too. Like, could you imagine the feelings they must have had to be like, crap, like we have concepts, we have ideas, we've tested things, we have data. It's not a full reset. It's just, we got to rebuild everything. It's easier to rebuild than it is to create and build. Right.
That's right. Exactly. It's a hard choice. They were in a tough spot. They had to make some tough decisions.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of people have said recently, like, where's Project Fairtail? We're seeing it. I think Project Fairtail was supposed to be something, and then this refactoring came up, and it is still Project Fairtail, but it was a much bigger project to get to Project Fairtail's goals, I think. So
I would agree with that.
So the biggest takeaway for here is, because they're talking about this, is that some people, wish that they would have heard this back in 2019. And I can understand that. But at this stage, I'm really in the state of clarifying where we are is better late than never. And I don't think there's a single fan out there who can't say this was a good move, because in its prior state, I don't think Pantheon could have ever succeeded. Even if it was launched, like, how could they build it with the state it was in? Like, how could it expand and become the world, that grows and grows and we grow with? Sometimes in life, and we've all been there, you got to take steps back to leap ahead. And this letter not just tells the story, but the letter itself takes a step back to explain where they are now. And I think it cleans up some communication. It connects the dots a little bit and gets back on that path of communication with the community that I think was very, very needed. So again, that was an epic minus rant there. I don't even want to know how long that went, but thank you for jumping in. But I mean, what else do you think, Derek? What else do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So my initial reaction to this was confusion, if I'm being perfectly honest. And it's because of the reasons I said a second ago, where it's like, some technical stuff that you don't necessarily understand, because I didn't really understand why these changes need to be made. And in my mind, the first thing, and I think a lot of people probably had the same thing, was that it was a case of trying to achieve perfection, or like a creative reimagining, right? I think that's the real fear with changes like with this. When you see changes like this, that's why they're being done. They're trying to facilitate some sort of creative reimagining. And if both of those, if that was the case, yeah, certainly. I mean, there's reason to be upset. Because this game can't withstand that right now. That's not something that they could feasibly do and keep the community behind them, I think. We've heard comments like this. People just don't understand for whatever reason. Like you said, they don't follow it as closely as we do. So it's a lot. Sometimes it's headline reading, it's TLDR kind of stuff. I think about the Black Rose Keep redesign. When they did that, we heard some of those comments. Like, I don't understand why they're redoing this. So I wanted to try and fully grasp more what was being said here. So I had to definitely go back and read it a few times. And the key here is really understanding what they said about the pipelines and allowing rapid implementation. So, even with a non-technical sort of standpoint, I realized that it wasn't that artistic choice. It's a functional choice. And like I said, it must have been really hard for them to bite the bullet and decide to rework things. Because of course, the other option was we're just going to keep with what we have. We're going to face the pain down the road, but we're just going to kick the can down the road and deal with it later, right? Making hard choices is a sign of a team that cares about their product and believes in their vision. If they don't care, if they didn't, they would have just kicked the can down the road, right?
Yep.
And I'll temper my comments saying that it's hard to imagine, one of the things I think it is hard to imagine that seeing the hard coding being a problem wasn't foreseeable. I'm sure it was. But I think it's important to remember that they needed to get the crowdfunding train rolling, like we said earlier, and they needed to have something. And I don't blame them for that. I think it's smart. I think crowdfunding is a difficult strategy, and nobody's really got it figured out completely yet. Like, there's no perfect crowdfunded games that I can think of anyway. Maybe somebody has one, but all that to say, if they keep iterating at a steady rate, it sounds like they're pretty confident that PA5 this is going to be a time of major development. And the next many months are going to be a pretty busy time coming up. So that's my takeaway from this section.
Yeah, and I'll add on to one thing you were talking about there with with the hard coding, right? Like, how is this not foreseeable? Do you ever think for a second, because Kyle is apparently like a genius, right? Like, everything we hear about Kyle, and I don't have any inside information about Kyle. I'm not saying this from anything, but just the things we've heard in newsletters and the way he talked, right? Like, he came in and this is when it happened. It's pretty safe to say he's probably, from a programming standpoint, the most veteran, knowledgeable person on the team, right? So maybe they didn't realize it. Like, is it a shock to anybody? Like, when we look at the position that people are in this game, which they deserve to be there, but people wear a lot of hats. Like, people aren't in the positions they started in, right? Like, the team has evolved and changed a lot. Like they said, there was a lot of volunteers at first. How great are those volunteers? And that's not to knock anybody, but, those are all real questions. Like, yes, when we look back at it, we say, wow, how didn't they see this was coming? And you know why we see it that way? Because Brad was at the helm. No. But outside of Brad, they were a small ragtag team. Like, that's what he said, right? A small scrappy group of people, mostly from the community, working as passion volunteers for a bit there, building a game. And when you put all those pieces together and you remove Brad, because Brad, I think, makes the company look bigger and more professional. When you strip away Brad, you say, actually, maybe it makes more sense. I don't know.
Which is ironic, because one of the things about Brad that we were drawn to, or and I think as a community are drawn to, was his down to earthness, right? And his one of us-ness, right? he was just a guy like us who loved, playing with the community and being a part of something. And so we brought in this group of people, and so I don't know. I mean, maybe they didn't foresee it. And like you said, it was, it's just the non, I want to say non-professional, but like the non-experienced,
green,
long-term, the green, right? Green sort of folks. Maybe they didn't see it. I don't know. I think that you could probably argue both sides. Maybe they didn't see it, or maybe they did. They just needed something to put on display, right? To get things going. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's a good debate.
Yeah. So the next section here is the importance of PreAlpha 5. So let me read that verbatim to what they said here. He says, and this brings us to PreAlpha 5, the current stage of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. PA5 is an incredibly significant stage of development in many ways. We're now working from the solid foundation of a well-architectured game client and a more comprehensive, efficient pipeline due to the work being done during Project Fairthail. PreAlpha 5 is the culmination of Project Fairthail. By the end of PA5, the game will encompass the feel of Pantheon, including most systems, and then they do say there is still a chance that we may need to hold on some systems from this stage, depending on timing and resources. and it will include a full progression path from 1 to 50. Even though we want PA5 to offer a full adventuring gameplay experience at Pantheon, it is still a pre-alpha phase. It is not content complete, and all zones outside of big sections of Fairthel are in gray box state. Previously seen zones like Theronfast and Avener's Pass have been redone to gray box spec to allow for proper pipeline and optimization. Secondly, this experience is needed so that it can be shared with potential partners. Publishers and investors need to see what Pantheon is, how it plays, and what it's all about. Several parties are interested in the concept, and we know to show them that we need this to show them it's a reality. We are and always will be eternally grateful for the kindness and generosity of the community and our early investors in getting us this far. But we're going to need more resources to get Pantheon done sooner than our modest team can realistically do by themselves in a reasonable time frame. PA5 serves as a testing area for this evaluation build. Testers help in putting the best possible experience into the hands of people who can accelerate development the most. Lastly, PA5 lays the foundation for alpha. Sure, it's gray boxed, it's not art complete, but the pre-alpha testers' feedback at this early stage affects the experience of the alpha testers coming in, and there are lots coming, so we want to make sure they have a complete experience to test. So that's the end of that article part there. So good thoughts here as well, not nearly as much as that last section, so don't worry, Theric, you won't have to keep yourself awake over there as I rant.
Okay.
But this kind of goes back to what I was saying about making a hard but correct decision, right? And in small conversations, I always got the vibe that the current state of the game right now, like recent conversations, is the best it's ever been in. PA5 is the best, hands down. It's so much further ahead of where this game has ever been. And that a lot of teams like really excited about this state of the game. What was always something I was sort of frustrated about was that, so this game's in the best state it's ever been in, and the community is getting more frustrated. They're not really aligned with where the team was. Again, all due to communication. It was sad because I could see the excitement internally, but the community frustrations, and again, rightfully so, we're taking away from that feeling of great progress and excitement for where it was, like where the game was. For even the developers were probably feeling a lot of pain. Like, man, we're in the best, spot we've ever been, and our fans are frustrated with us, right? And again, it all stems from communication. So the biggest piece of this section, however, is to come clean about funding. I think a long time ago, it was stated that Pantheon is funded through launch and more funds can speed it up. And it was sort of repeated all over the community. It kind of became a way of life. And I think I was even guilty of saying this, but now looking back, I think it was pretty naive to think that funding was just done and good and okay, right? And that's not a knock on VR. That's not a knock on their spending, none of that. I think they've done a really good job on that in the spending. I just think that perhaps it's something that was said sort of nonchalantly and sort of became a power statement that was really hard to get away from. However, we all know that this team needs to expand. Like, there's not a single person that didn't know we needed to, get more artists or whatever, or get more people to program. Like, we always knew VR needed to expand. And maybe that, while they have the passion to complete it no matter what, it's not really fair to them or us to just stay status quo in size and funding. I mean, they would need to get this game out in an acceptable time frame, like they said. So, also, there's something I'll give Ben a lot of credit on, because he's always mentioned this on streams, that the game is crowdfunded and that their help, anybody's help will get the game to come out quicker. It's literally on everything. Like, we even jokingly meme it, right? Like, let's insert the Ben statement here, right? But he always has said that. And again, it's that clarity. It's the transparency. It's this other statement not being put to bed, right? He's saying this, but there's this power statement behind it all. So, while this piece was here, however, I think that it was the boldest statement, and it's something that they've talked about meeting with publishers, investors, partners, etc. And this is the first time it was just really boldly stated with like a purpose. And I know a large chunk of the gaming community fears the term publisher, but let's be real with ourselves. VR doesn't have the means to publish this game and release it on its own. They're going to at least need a partnership to do it. I truly believe that while this may cause some panic for some, it's something that, once again, although cloudy, had writing on the wall, and it just makes sense. Publishing is like a whole nother monster from developing. We have to trust in the fact that all the blood, sweat, and tears they put into the game, that they're not just going to be looking to hand it over, like the decision making and the core concepts, just to get a partner that will allow the game to come out quicker. So, Theric, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, this was the part of the newsletter that I found sort of a bit of a roller coaster in terms of how I felt when I was reading it. I was really excited at the beginning. Knowing we're entering a time where, the most feature complete version of the game is in sight is incredibly encouraging. It's a clear indication, of what the future holds. And they use the terms full gameplay experience and feature complete. That's not done lightly, right? Like, be aware of the significance of that. That's not something that they're just going to throw around. But, so like you said, my least favorite part is the funding piece. I think it's going to cause, if I have to be honest here, I think it's going to cause a lot of grief for them. Like you talked about, we know the questions about the finances have always been there. Like, again, it's a crowdfunded game, so there's always that conversation going on. I think you said the most consistent message we've gotten is that it's funded through to launch, with any additional funding just simply serving to speed up the development. And in my opinion, when they say we're going to need more resources to get Pantheon done sooner than our modest team can realistically do by themselves in a reasonable time frame, that's an admission in my mind that technically, while what they said previously was true, it maybe wasn't the whole story. And I'm not trying to be, critical or mean or anything like that, or say that they were lying or anything like that. It's a way of saying that, yes, if launch was 8 years away, they were fully funded. Like, I'm just pulling 8 years out of the air, right? It's not the actual number, but in this letter, there's an acknowledgement that they've now come to realize that what they want to accomplish can't be done in a reasonable time frame with that perspective. And let's be honest, it's really easy to see this as a roadblock. And there are going to be people who see it as an unsurmountable challenge and they're going to say, told you so, and dead game and all that kind of stuff. But you can think that if you like, but I'm going to suggest a reframing of it, because I don't think that that's the way to go about looking at this. And I think what they had was an important realization, and I don't want to speak for them, but what I hear is it's time that they believe that the product they have now and what they've built is marketable, and it's in a place where they can attract that investment needed. So what they're saying is, rather than languishing in some sort of extended development time that, the crowd, the community is not going to be happy with, they're going to actively seek to get the game done in a reasonable amount of time. And they gave some, at the end of the newsletter, we'll talk about it, they gave some sort of outline about what that might look like. And for the community, what does this mean to us? It means, as a community, it's time for us to really show off what Pantheon's all about. They want to attract investment. They want to get partnerships, a publisher involved. Let's show potential investors what they're investing in a game with a huge community already in place, and one that's mature, one that knows the genre, and one that's willing to make this game, as we've come to know it, profitable, right? Like, we've stepped up. A lot of people have stepped up their time, with their energy and their money, right, to support this game. And now what we're hearing from VR is, look, we're ready to take that next step and bring somebody in. Like you said, it was a no-brainer that they had to get a publisher involved. There's no question about that. The part that's difficult, I think, for the community here is saying, well, we don't, if we don't get more resources right now, we're looking at an unreasonable time frame to completion. That's the difficult part. And I can understand that on some aspect, but I think we need to, like I said, reframe it a little bit.
Yeah, really good breakdown. And I definitely understand where there could be some cause for concern, but I think you did a good job. Like, it depends on how you want to frame it, right? And there's many ways to do it, and everyone's entitled to frame it how they want. Obviously I'm someone who's just pretty optimistic, and again, getting to have some of the conversations I have with the developers one-on-one, I just, I'm very confident, and that's all I'll say on it. I'm very confident in the things I say. I'm not here to BS anybody. I'm not here to just pull the sheet over someone's eyes. Like, I wouldn't be doing this 40 hours a week for this game.
That's what I was just going to say. I was like, I could spend my time doing a lot of other things. I wouldn't be putting my time into this if I didn't believe in this, and if I didn't think, like you said, confident in the ability that this game's going to be our home. One day.
It's funny too, because like a lot of people, like one of the sayings is put your money where your mouth is, right? Like, I think we do that. Like, people can say we're positive, but like, literally, I put 40 hours a week plus into this. I've drugged Theric into making this a part-time career for him. It's extensive. Like, my week is planned around work, a tiny bit of sleep, time to take care of my daughter, in Pantheon. That is every day of my life. Like, I'm not kidding you. There's nothing else. And every once in a while I eat. So,
that sounds very familiar.
Yeah. So let's jump in. There's a couple sections left. This next section is called the PA5 plan. So here, I'm going to read it verbatim. They say the 2 shakeout sessions are now behind us and helped identify several key issues that were needed to address on the account login server levels and some of our systems. And we're ready to begin PreAlpha 5. This is the arc of the Pantheon legacy so far. The end of PA5 is where it all comes together in a playable game. It's the part where Rocky stops at Father Carmine's to get a blessing on his way to the fight. PreAlpha 5 is a collaboration between the dev team and the community. The dev team has the advantage of rapid iteration to get us to alpha quicker, and the testing community can help get us to alpha by testing productively. PA5 is a multi-session phase. Each session will have new features and/or content to test. Due to the updated client and pipelines, development during this phase will be much more rapid than in the past. So there will be substantial differences between builds. For example, Shakeout 2 had 2 available classes. The next session will have 4 and include some new systems. More on this later. Zones will be added over the sessions as well. By the end of PA5, you will expect to see 1 to 50 Pantheon experience and leveling, with all classes available and most systems launch and play. The term, so they quote here, PA5 proper was a term that caused more confusion than it was meant to be, so we're no longer going to use it. It was just a reference to the bulk of PA5 sessions. Please don't expect all of PA5 to be available in the first sessions. It's just not possible. Earlier sessions will be shorter, usually 2 to 3 hours, give or take, depending on what needs testing. Especially, expect these types of sessions to occur roughly every several weeks, for the most part, to start. There may not always be a need for external testing, however, so the schedule is evaluated internally on a weekly basis. As testing continues, the game becomes more stable and more fun, leading to more sessions and more flexibility. A large number of the testing sessions will be focused on specific areas of the game, but as we progress, the realm will open up to more organic gameplay for some sessions so that testers can play Pantheon organically every once in a while. The current focus is features, functionality, and core loop gameplay. Art finish comes later, so testers expect gray boxing. It is a central part for us to getting to where we need to go. Expect bugs. Please help us by logging in the session times and tracking them down. And expect progress. You will see measurable differences and significant progress as we move through PA5. So when's the next pre-alpha phase? Next week, Wednesday, October 21st and Thursday, October 22nd in their timeframes. Pre-alpha 5 testers will be receive an email this week confirming the time slot and realm they're registered to. You'll be able to change your preferred slot and realm if needed by opening up a sport ticket. We understand that some of a week's notice may be a pain to plan around. Our apologies for any inconvenience. There will be many more sessions on the horizon, and we will do our best to keep the schedule updated as early as possible. But please keep in mind that with more rapid development, some sessions may pop up and need to be done sooner rather than later. Whew. So that's probably the last long run there. And I actually don't have a ton of things to say on this. The big thing here is shedding some of the confusing terms and just straightforward saying at the end of PA5, here's what we're going to be. And on this journey, we're going to see classes and content every session. It's just clear and to the point. There's no more odd terminology to cloud things up. Obviously it's exciting that we're going to be diving back into the game next week. So how could you not win there? But in short notice isn't the best for everybody. But I'm led to believe we're going to be seeing sessions much more quickly. So while it will stink for people who might miss this with short notice, I have really high hopes that we'll be in sooner rather than later, even if you do miss it. So just my thoughts on that. What about you?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is a good just sort of state of the game. It makes you realize how long it's been since we've had a state of the game, right? in something like this substantial. People get the feeling sort of lost in the woods sometimes, I think, without it. I like what they said, the term arc of this is the arc of Pantheon's development. I think that's a great choice of words. It puts a real mental timeline in place, and I think it helps. With the way things are laid out, these shorter focused testing sessions moving forward, there's going to be a real feeling of tangible progression in the community. And I hope that translates well. Just to talk about the PA5 thing for a second, back when they said PA5 was in the summer, it ended up being a little nebulous. We saw the first 2 shakeout sessions, and it looked like moving forward, what was being called PA5 proper was going to sort of resemble something that looked like that. And there was just a little confusion about it. I'm glad that they've abandoned that idea and just sort of going forward, let's just be straightforward about it. It's reasonable to conclude that PA5 would have looked a lot like PA1 through 4. But when you take into account, like we talked about already, where it's at in development, this makes a lot more sense. And they're right. This is a chance for the community when we really have the chance to move things along. So if you're in pledge to the level to participate in testing, think of yourself as part of the community part of the development team, actually. And then think about that. If you add that into the team, think about how big the team has grown then. And a bigger team equals greater output, more progress, to an extent that they can, in terms of the reporting and the bug stuff that they can process. But This is an opportunity for the community to really, fill in some gaps and help out. So it's exciting.
Yeah, without a doubt. So the last section here is called the future. It says, and I quote, "Now on to alpha. We do not have dates yet, as there are a lot of systems and content for us to test in PA5, and PA5 will last, quote, as long as it takes," end quote. We certainly are not going to spend years in PA5, but we will spend the time we need to get the game into the state where it is a playable, enjoyable game that covers full progression path from 1 to 50. We are actively taking steps to improve our communication with you, so please know that while we are nearing completion of PA5, we will make it abundantly clear. In the meantime, even if you are not a pre-alpha tester, we will be sharing the progress with you routinely. We say it a lot, but we can't say it enough. Thank you all once again for your support. We're a small team without the kind of funding that some other studios are able to start with. Only through your continued support have we been able to get to this point. This is as much as your game as it is ours. We're all in this together, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We know that there has been a great deal of confusion around Project Fairthale and PreAlpha 5. We did a poor job at communicating the nuances and the amount of work that was needed to get us into a workable state, the workable state that we are now in, which left you with long periods of wondering what was going on. We can't undo that, but we want to get better going forward. Our deepest, sincerest thank you to all those who stuck it through. And to those of you whose belief in us has wavered, we hope that through our actions, we can earn your confidence again. We're crazy excited about where we are now. Amazing things are ahead, and we want to share this experience together. After all, talking about the journey with friends, isn't that what Pantheon is all about? So just real quick, my thoughts, a few things stand out here. They came out right there and said, like, if you're not a tester, you're not going to be left in the dark. That's something big. I think testers getting to actually experience the game is more than enough advantage for their status, in my opinion. I think sharing information with the greater Pantheon community is important, and no more will people be in the dark. Like, I really hope that's true. I'm sure there'll be confusion. There'll be stuff that's cloudy, but I hope that they'll be quick to correct it when the community speaks. I like that they own some of the issues around this communication and generally, like I said, cloudy state of the game. But to move forward and improve, you have to acknowledge the missteps, and I think they did that well. I also think that it shows they were listening to the community. As I said earlier, would you have liked to see it sooner? Sure, but better late than never. And in this case, I'm really proud of how they represented this. The game is in a better place than it's ever been before, and hands down, 100% confidence I can say that. Don't let art assets fool you.
Yeah.
What about you? Yeah,
definitely. The tone here is right. If you know me and we, been listening to this show, with me, like, humility is a big, I really respect humility. And when I see that in people, and I think this shows VR knows that they're fans, and they respect their fans. The people following this game, we're not new to the game, so to speak. We're old and wise enough that we see, shenanigans a mile away, basically. I applaud their willingness to improve their communication and acknowledge their deficits. It's a calculated risk always. If you open up and you talk about your issues and you show your warts, sort of thing, it opens you up to criticism, of course. But they actually don't shy away from that. That's one of the things I respect as well. It's not an easy decision, but like we saw with the refactoring, the ability to make hard decisions is a sign of a good team, right? Now, how much goodwill does this buy them? It's an open question. Some people will buy it, some people won't, and we'll see that coming up in the comments here in a bit. As I said, the community knows the MMO landscape, right? Acknowledge your mistakes, understand people hate arrogance and high-handedness more than a bad choice. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. But also, you only get so many chances. I mean, you don't get an endless amount of mulligans, and being transparent is really the only way to sort of, extend that lifespan, if you will. And you don't want to run out of rope eventually. At the end of the day, the takeaway here for me is that we can be expecting to be kept abreast of more what's going on in development with more clarity. Like you said, it's clear alpha is the next step, and we should expect that to begin when PA5 achieves its goals. No, we didn't get any dates, but we're going to get more consistent and clear updates. And I think we'll get a good sense when that time is imminent. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's tons of people pledged to alpha testing. And what I said earlier about the development team expanding, if you consider the pre-alpha testers part of that team, think about what's going to happen when the alpha testers come in, right? So we're on the precipice of something really exciting here. We're on the precipice of something big happening. And I think that excitement comes through. And I think you hear it as they conclude the letter, sort of talking about what it means to them. So let's get excited about it.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. We just spent 50 minutes reading a newsletter and talking about it. Guys, we're going a little overtime today. It is a podcast. Hit the pause button if you need a break, and you can pick up back again when you're in the car. But I think it was well worth it. And it is important that we get into the next phase here as we start talking about what the community has to say.
When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into social media and see what the discussion is all about.
Okay, so you've heard our thoughts on the producer's letter, but this show's about the community, right? So we need to talk about what people are saying, what's going on out there. And we're going to look at the official forums, Reddit, a couple other places, see what people had to say. As you might imagine, there's a lot of different voices on this newsletter. And I've tried to group some of the comments sort of into similar points of focus and try to keep in mind, I want to provide a balanced perspective. So, Minus and I are on the same page, I think, for most of this stuff, but we might not agree with somebody's perspective. That doesn't mean it's not worth talking about. So when I include, certain comments here, it's not to, be critical or anything like that. It's other people's perspectives. The only requirement is that it's thought out and, it adds something to the conversation. So you might, there might be some that you say, no, that doesn't really add anything, but we're going to talk about them anyway. I had to make some judgment calls.
Yeah.
So let's start with talking about the piece about redoing the coding and the refactoring. This got a lot of traction actually on Reddit. And Minus, just jump in here as we go along if you have anything you want to add, because I'm going to paraphrase a couple of these. They're a little long, but so over on Reddit, Malambers said, I feel none of this is really totally unexpected, but it's brave of them to open up and confirm it. It can be hard to realize you have to go back and redo a lot of the work that was already done for a project to have a future. The pressure, I think this is a good point here. He says the pressure to always show progress conflicts with this, and their choice to do the better thing shows they're committed to delivering this project truly. I know it was the right choice, and I hope they can gain support from the community and the backers to carry the game to completion. Joe Biza said, love the letter. Nothing wrong with learning a new and better way. I'm glad they did it when they did it. Hopefully they keep driving forward without any more backpedaling. Godspeed to VR. Can't wait to lose myself in the world. Bison ST actually talked about, you had mentioned earlier about EverQuest having this hard coding issue, and that's how it was designed. And he actually does some quotes from somewhere sort of talking about that, and says, based on what he's heard from other ex-developers, he's glad that they decided to ditch the sort of just get it done attitude, like moving forward, even though knowing it's going to be problems later on. And our buddy Nathan Napalm chimed in on this and talked about how EverQuest today still suffers from hard coding. But in 1999, that was basically, they were inventing it. That's how it had to be done. And it's understandable. He says that Pantheon started this way too, considering, where their roots are, right? And Brad McQuaid and his history with EverQuest. So it was bound to happen. So he just talks about, being glad they were able to rework the code, make it more modern, flexible, and good communication to be able to do that. And then somebody else, there was actually a lot of talk about this, got into some pretty technical, programming details about what hard coding is and blah, 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 blah. But somebody said, Jonesy on Reddit, he seemed pretty knowledgeable about this. He said, hard coding starts out faster and then becomes a nightmare later on. They had to get something up and running to show the investors. So it's not surprising that they did it like this. Mm-hmm. And then, so there was some back and forth about that. Not everybody was supportive. On the forums, Philo, he takes the approach that it's changed a lot since what they initially described Pantheon as being. Here's what he says. He says, they bit off more than they can chew. Stock assets would have been fine. The removal of many complicated systems would have been fine. Less detailed graphics would have been fine. So less continents, less classes, less detailed zones, vegetation, blah, 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 blah. He said they got away from the niche target audience that they were advertising originally and are trying to be the next big thing. The letter says says what a lot of us have known for a long time. At this point, clear timelines are required, or it's just more talk. So he's dissatisfied with it. He's sort of one of the.
The only thing I'd add into that is, so I'm not going to get super technical here, and I'm not also an expert on what I'm about to say, but like using assets are designed differently by different designers. And when you put in like all these assets designed by different people, they're done in different ways for like scalability and like the pixel counts and the resolution. Like there's a lot, like using just tons of assets to build a game is not a good thing, because like some of those assets might not even work together well. And then you figure that out later when all of a sudden your CPU and network cards are running through the roof trying to get these assets to work together. So it actually, I be honest with you, like, I don't think you can make a game with stock assets unless they're all designed by the same person. Like, I just don't think that's feasible for a game that's going to be, you know, a large scale game. My opinion.
You know what's kind of funny about that is that I think I look back at old streams and I think it's just the problem is the stock assets looked really good from an EQ purist standpoint. They were familiar. They felt familiar, I think, to a lot of us. I get that. So I hear what he's saying. Like, I know what he's getting at. He's coming from a real EQ purist sort of standpoint. Like, don't worry about making it fancy. Just give us the mechanics that EverQuest had and go forward with that. And that's not uncommon to hear in the community. We do hear that. So, you know, I'm not, you know, it's an opinion and, you know, I don't feel the same way, but I respect what he's saying.
No, it's a good opinion. And you're right. It is out there a lot. So,
Questar also on the forums, he responded almost directly to that. He said he was relieved by this letter. He did say he wished it came in September, but that's water over the dam. It explains very well why, and what we saw in the PA5 shakeout seemed like kind of a step backwards. Now, VR has explained what seemed like it had to be starting over, that Pantheon Rise of the Fallen will be a great AAA MMORPG that it deserves to be, and he's excited for the game. And he just said he disagrees with what Philo said a second ago. So talking about how, you know, they aren't trying to be the next great big thing. They're trying to innovate. They're trying to bring the genre forward.
Yeah.
Our buddy Erikai on Reddit said, you know, I wish this would make all the people who said, oh, they restarted the whole game, understand a little bit better the reasoning behind it. I've seen some of the criticism that they probably should have anticipated that their hard coding might cause, which we mentioned earlier, and taken steps to rectify it much earlier to avoid this backpedaling, but they had to do it eventually. And I don't disagree that they did it now. It would have been nice if we had a bit more foresight, but that's the way it goes. That said, it is what it is. It happened. At least they're doing it now rather than rushing to try and ship a product that was flawed from the get-go and then floundering to try and fix it and update it. So, and like I said earlier with, you know, sort of Vanguard 2.0, that's, I think harkens back to that a little bit. So Erikai's satisfied with the newsletter. He thinks it was good. It didn't get him hyped up, but it's nice to see them taking a bit more of a humble approach and, you know, saying we messed up. Here's a step we're taking to fix it and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the hard coding refactoring issue. Let's move on and talk about what people thought about the funding issue. So this is a huge talking point. Obviously, it's one of the easiest ones to attack. On the official forums, there's quite a bit of conversation. And Nefel posted he always posts really well thought out stuff. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because I think there's a lot here. But he said, you know, I don't think VR is saying they need more money to be able to finish Pantheon. They're saying that the more money will allow them to finish it in a reasonable timeframes. One of the things that we constantly see in the community is, why are we nearly 7 years into this and still only in pre-alpha? And I think this producer's letter does a good job of answering that. I also think it shows how close the game is actually being ready for alpha. Will that be another 3 months or will it be a year? Depends. More artists, more programmers help the team move faster. He appreciates them being more transparent, even if it can feel a little off-putting. And I kind of agree with that. I think that's well said. And sometimes the truth is hard to hear. Sometimes it just takes a while. So he relates back to, you know, other projects that have folded, you know, and been shown to be dishonest with their fans and saying, you know, there's this internet sort of fear, this internet skepticism about Pantheon because of other projects like that. And it has an effect. So people make dark predictions, they peddle conspiracy theories, they do all that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah. And it's so funny. And it's like conspiracy theories, like from a game developer company. I'm like, I don't know about that. Yeah. It goes, but this letter goes a long way to combating that. So yeah, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, but in my reading, it's real and it's honest. And that's an acknowledgement that they're building a game to support tens of thousands of players is a hard thing to do. So yeah, good.
You know what's funny about the whole thing? Like, I bet you that if a majority of this team put the amount of hours they put into this working at McDonald's for basic wage, they probably would have made more money than what they're making right now. Like, hands down, right? Like they're not, like I said before, nobody's making bank on this team right now. Like this is invest blood, sweat, tears, years of your life, unrefundable time for this hope that you can get this game out that'll be worth it. Like there's people need to realize that a lot of people aren't willing to just donate years of their life for a chance, right? And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. You know, I mean, sometimes these days, I will admit it's hard to believe in sort of hard to believe in good things, sometimes with just the news of the world and things that are going on. It can be tricky, and you can't blame people for being skeptical. But you're right. I mean, this is a team that's not, they're not secret millionaires that nobody knows about.
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah. So on the forums, Mathir said he appreciates the honesty. Finally, going dark with the reboot was never the way to handle this. Brad was skeptical about that decision. Outside of the burning through pledge money, not much has changed, though. The future of this game was always going to depend on what publishers and big dollar investors thought about the Project Fairtail demo. You guys have been clear and honest about that. Anyone with common sense has known the only way for an MMO can be built to the scale that they're discussing is with millions in investment and a much bigger team. I'm glad you guys went for it and are putting your best foot forward. I wish you luck in landing a deal to fund this game. I think Pantheon either folds completely or lands a big time investment deal in the next 6 months, maybe a little longer. Go all out. He says Chris Perkins talking about the game is your best asset. So I don't think anybody would disagree with that. A couple other people on Reddit said, neat letter, but ultimately it tells us that they do not have the resources to finish the game. They need Project Fairtail to be a success, to hook more investors. Hopefully they can do what they need to do and get the game to a spot where it gets the funding. But, he's saying, long timeline is still probably a reality. And somebody else agreed with that. Just sort of, it sounds like they're crunching to get Project Fairtail to an acceptable quality where they can showcase it. I would disagree. I think that what this letter said is that they're actually there already. I believe that they think they're there already. So hopefully and so he goes on to just finish by saying, if they fail to wow investors, I don't think there's much of a future here. So a couple others just on this issue, because we're kind of repeating ourselves a little bit here. Doherty on the forum said the producer's letter is refreshing. And in terms of the level of information it gives out, there's always semantics. And basically what this person is saying is like, the words you use are important. And, saying funded through to launch means a lot of different things. And people went back and forth on this thread quite a bit about just playing the word game, and trying to figure out what they actually meant by that. So you've got a little bit into the weeds in there, but, and then we'll just finish off with a couple more things. Libwick on Twitter said, crossing my fingers it gets picked up. No reason it shouldn't. So many games can't demonstrate a community anything like this. And I think that's a good point, and I really like that. That's what I was sort of talking about earlier, saying, this game comes with a community built into it, right?
Yeah.
Like, who wouldn't want to? I don't know, man. It seems like a pretty good investment to me. And the last one, I'm gonna break our sort of no swearing thing here, but it says, if people give a shit about
no swearing,
we didn't really. Yeah. It's just for iTunes purposes, whatever. Who cares? I'll put the explicit checkbox on. It says, if people give a shit about this game, now is the time, it seems, to give a little bit more of a shit about the game. Be active. Try to find that ball of positivity inside you and spread it around. We as the base community are also part of the package for an investor. We should at least try our best to create a positive environment on the official forums to the best of our ability.
Yeah, that was totally by a guy named The Way for Backwards. That's a great post.
Yeah, I know. It's a good name. Okay, so lastly, we're going to just see what people said about the level of transparency in the letter and talking about sort of the path forward, the PA5 path forward. On the forums, Nicodemus said, it's a good note. I really appreciate the clarity it provides. Ben touched on it at the end of the letter, and I won't pile on too much, but I think this letter would have done wonders for the community about a year ago, right before or after Brad's passing, perhaps. In any case, blown away that there's going to be the full 1 to 50 experience in place. One of his biggest fears was that Project Fairtail would be finished. There would only be something like 1 to 20 implemented in one specific region or something like that. So he's happy to see the full game experience, so to speak. Walking Waste on Reddit said, greatly appreciated. Hopefully people take the time to actually read it in its entirety, including the final paragraph. Hopefully they can keep the transparency. Hopefully they can keep this transparency a continued thing in the future as they move forward. So hopefully people read it, but if they didn't, they can listen to our podcast and they can hear it here. So
for 50 minutes.
Yeah. Sometimes that's easier. Salacious Lion. So he says, VR, please hire somebody for marketing. 3 weeks, closed pre-alpha intervals may be good from a game development standpoint, but that helps you exactly zero when it comes to absolute number one priority, which is money to survive. And he talks about just the importance of, getting that funding. If money is your true priority, you're putting 100% of your effort into getting Fairthale presentable and as close to a final state as possible. You need a long gameplay stream that's designed like a sales pitch to reinvigorate the community, grab attention from outside the community bubble, help potential investors gain confidence in the project. Other games have done this in a less playable state and received lots of money. So
I'll tell you what, Eric, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I'm going to hereby write on this, officially out for the world, right on this episode. I'm going to say that we at Pantheon Plus would love to help stream and show off this content as much as possible, free of charge, and drive as much donations and pledges as we possibly can. We don't need anything for it. Just let us in.
Breaking news that nobody is surprised by. The most obvious news in the world. You heard it here first. We wanna sell the game for you. That's awesome. So somebody else said this was good. As a doubter, this is exactly what I was looking for. A degree of faith has been restored. When you have good reasons for a decision, don't hide them. So he's encouraging them to be more, show off what they're doing and be honest about their decisions. Big Dog Chris on the forums said this community is mature enough to know the truth, and transparency helps show you respect your audience's intelligence. We needed this. I'm glad to know a lot of work was done in the past 2 years to put Pantheon into a place where it can grow more easily. And he has a feeling that alpha will be here sooner than we know. Then a couple more on Twitter. Coldfire989 said, I appreciate the candid explanation for what took so long. I wish it would have come out sooner. So a lot of people are saying should have come out sooner. Like you said earlier, I think people felt that too. Co-Carnage actually responded to their Twitter post about this, saying, what a great update. He says, thanks guys, this is big. Looking forward to seeing where you take this. So like we were selling, like Salacious Lion was saying a minute ago about selling it. Co-Carnage would be a good idea maybe.
Yep.
As well as us.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Co's going to get more people than us, but hey,
of course,
give us a shot.
Yeah, exactly.
You talked about Rocky going to Carmine, right? Like,
there you go.
Co-Carnage is Apollo Creed. Let Rocky in the ring.
Yeah, Clubber Lang, something like that. So then somebody said, got to be honest, I've been thinking about pledging to Pantheon for some months. I hadn't gotten the push of confidence until now. Project Fairthale kind of got me there, but this letter really convinced me. So that's basically it. That's what the community has spoken. This isn't every perspective, of course, but I think it did provide a representative sample of what I was able to find out there. And I just want to finish by saying it's obvious that a lot of thought was put into the letter, and a big thank you, to Ben Dean for being bold with this and providing this information, the good and the bad, because honesty is key at the end of the day. You have our trust, you have my bow. Let's bring the project home, right? Minus anything else before we move on from this, put the newsletter to bed.
No, man, I think, you broke it into 3 great sections of, feedback there. We heard from both sides on it. Like, where I'm going to stand. I'm going to be honest. If they make me mad, I'll be the first guy screaming from the rooftops. Don't get me wrong. I just really believe in these guys. When you believe in something or someone, like, you root for them, and I'm rooting for these guys. Like, I have no reason not to root for these guys to succeed. And I'll be critical. I'll be critical in private conversations with them. And if it's something where I got to stand on a rooftop and scream, I'll do it. But it never has felt that need. And maybe looking back again, if I had looked more from the community perspective instead of my own, it was very murky. Things were very murky. It was hard to find the info. It wasn't straightforward. Things weren't cleared up. Certain things were left to just be said, and then it kind of they grew its own life because it wasn't put to bed, right? There's a big difference between saying, well, we clarified something and then putting something to rest. There's a big difference there. And I think some of the things that haven't been put to rest about Pantheon are haunting them or were haunting them. And I think this does put some of that to rest. And I think it's a fantastic newsletter. I mean, if you're a fan of Pantheon, listen, there's different types of fans of Pantheon in this community. There's fans that are ecstatic and can't wait and want to see more. There's fans that are, kind of just patiently waiting. There's fans that are frustrated. There's people that are at the end of their wit. Every single one of those types of people, every one of them, from the spewers of toxicity to the whitest of knights that some people say, all of them want the same end goal.
Yeah, that's so
all
true.
Of them. No matter who you are on the spectrum, from super negativity to super positivity, when Pantheon launches and we're able to step into Terminus and start our adventure, every one of those player types will be there for that. So that's a big thing that I'm trying to step back and not just jump on toxic people and get into fights on Reddit and get into fights here and there. Cause I'm a little more aggressive than some other content creators. I'll jump right into the fray. I kind of enjoy a back and forth as long as, like you said, there's at least some bit of intelligence in there. But again, stepping back and saying like, listen, not everybody puts the time I put into this, right? Like, I get it. I understand, guys. I'm saying that very boldly. I understand how you can be frustrated. I understand when things are murky. We're going to be here to try to clear up things as much as we can and be better about clearing up things and showing facts to do it. But this is a great step forward. This had to happen. You can't get to step 3 without taking the first step. And this is the first step. So
yeah, well said, man. Well said. And that wraps up the community discussions for the week.
Well, we've been doing this for a while. It's a long show. We're an hour and 10 minutes. It's probably going to be our longest. But Derek, what do you say? Let's hit the mailbox up and answer a couple questions just because that's what we got to do.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's run through them.
Here's the mail. It never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it gets here, I just yell, mail. We're getting sued.
Okay. So we have some questions from the community this week. And our first one comes from JJ. He says, players create characters for different reasons, to live out the fantasy or to represent themselves in the game. How important is character customization to you? And how deep do you feel Pantheon's character customization should be? So you know what? I'm going to go first here because thinking about this, it actually made me kind of wonder, like, how many people recreate themselves like in the game? I'd like to do like a Twitter poll. Like, do you create somebody that looks like you, or do you create somebody that looks like totally different? That'd be interesting to know, because I always make somebody that looks, similar, features similar to myself, kind of thing. But maybe that's narcissistic. I don't really know. I think character customization is important, but man, games these days kind of go overboard with it. I think I don't have any, I have no artistic power and no ability artistically to make millions of shaders and little percentages, all those things. I just don't do anything with them. I play around with them and I end up looking horribly out of proportion, with my face. My cheekbones are way too high and all that kind of stuff. So I just go back to face A or face B. But I do want different hairstyles, that's for sure. And I want some other choices along those lines. But I don't think it needs to be crazy, over the top. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, BDO is the craziest over the top one. You can actually create characters from movies and games and anime and all kinds of stuff if you spend the time doing it, right? It doesn't need that. It does need more than WoW has. As funny as that is saying, I know WoW's recently finally added to it. I think you need a lot of hair options. I think you need a lot of face options. I think you need, some sizing options. It doesn't need to be crazy, but if you want to be someone who has a little bit of a gut or something like that, there should be a way to have very slight proportion changes without going crazy, but that does create a lot of issues with armor fitting. Yeah. I don't know. I at the end of the day, if the armor looks cool, a lot of that goes away, I guess. I think it would be more so the hair and face and skin color stuff should be good. I'd say that's really important in those aspects.
Yeah. Okay, good. Next question is from Nemufe. And Nemufe asks, do you think certain NPCs should have protected status from being killed or charmed? So quest NPCs, class trainers, bankers, that kind of thing. Or should players have the freedom to kill / fully interact with any NPC despite possible disruption to other players if they're willing to, pay the price, take whatever faction hit or any kind of thing like that? What do you think?
I think there should be some that are unkillable. I do think there's some NPCs you just can't combat. That's the easiest way to do it. Just make them immune, unable to combat.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that I would say make them killable, but make them badass, nobody screwed with Holly Windstalker in the early days. Nobody had, messed around with the Priest of Discord because he had that, crazy death touch ability. You might have to so if you can take them down, go for it. Right. But don't incentivize it at all. Don't give them some kind of crazy loot or experience or
no loot, quick respawn, no experience.
Yeah, exactly. Quick respawn in case somebody needs them for something, but make them killable. I don't see the problem. It just make it really hard. If there's some Uber guild, just camping one and killing one just to piss people off and be annoying, well, you've heard it before, bring friends, right? Go get your friends and deal with it. So I don't know. It's kind of a fun question though.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm okay with I'm going to actually change my stance because you did a good job. As long as they drop no loot, they're super hard. You don't get experience. There's no benefit except for saying that you did it and it respawns quickly. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. The next one actually is kind of interesting because there's some beans that were spilled earlier in the week, and this question touches on them. It's from John Wayne, and he says, "We heard about dispositions earlier in the week, learning that they can actually apply to players as well as NPCs. What do you think would be a fun disposition to be affected by as a player?" So I'll give a little context where he's coming from here. This was on the Joppa's interview on Theory Forge. He actually said players, what they want to do is the plan is to have players be able to acquire some of the NPC dispositions, and mobs will actually look for those dispositions to try and exploit them. Just a pretty cool idea. And we hadn't heard that before. It fits into the theme of what they've talked about, NPCs being able to use like player type abilities and skills. And they have like some dispositions. They have one that's planned. They haven't named it yet, making mobs more susceptible to charm. He also said they have one called Mana Craze. And this one sounds super cool. It means basically they're immune to taunt, and the mob will hone in on any mana users, drain their mana, and then grow stronger from it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, isn't that cool? Like, it's pretty neat. We should actually talk about that more in a later episode, some point down the road. I'm not really sure how these might affect a player, but to answer the question, but the ones we do know about, I think it's kind of fun to think about how it would apply to a player. I don't know, but if the alarmist disposition was on a player, like what if it made you start like spamming shout, yelling for help or something like that, or made you run towards like the closest guard, like the NPC guard? That might be kind of funny. That was the only one I could think of. What about? Do you have any ideas about that?
Like if you're afraid of fire. And all of a sudden,
pyrophobia.
Yeah. The one thing it's related to this sort of that was awesome to me is that the abilities we have are going to be able to be used by them. So like literally an NPC can taunt you and make it so you have to target it. Like that is the coolest thing ever. I'm so excited for that. I can't even tell you.
It's awesome.
That is that is the coolest thing as a tank. Like I always said, what if a DPS is whooping up on the cleric and an NPC comes over and taunts me off as a rogue and I got to fight the tank? I'm like, crap, I'm stuck on the tank. Like that is the coolest thing. I hope that is in the game, and that sounds awesome. So
yeah, they got to make that happen. Okay, so next question is, how do you think the Archive's true birth? This is from Ison, and they say, how do you think the Archive's true birth, so their elemental infusion, will affect melee abilities as well as casting abilities? I'll let you take this one. Yeah,
I mean, we've seen melee abilities that have like, elemental effects on them. So I'm sure it would be the same way as a spell that has elemental effects, right? Like there's like holy magic damage from paladins and clerics that are like, melee style, and, monk's going to have, I think, like wind and things like that. So I think it'll work exactly how the melee abilities work is in relation to how the casting abilities work. I don't think you'll see much of a difference. I think they're all going to have some sort of properties for certain abilities. So
yeah, it sort of goes to the racial passives on the website when it talks about the Archive, and they do have an attunement that grants a bonus to elemental based abilities. So like you said, I think it's going to be kind of cool that we're going to see like you're going to be able to see an Archive like in the game just by looking at them and be able to tell sort of what they're good at, like what they might be best suited for. So if like you see one with like the fire, attunement, you're going to see like, oh, it's a fire Archive. So I know that they do this, or maybe just tell by the gear that they're wearing, they're a monk. Oh, it's a water monk, right? Like it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of unique to the Archive. I like that. Okay, last question. I know we've been going long. We got to answer this one though. This is from Twitter. This is the only response we got on Twitter this week, so we have to always honor that response. It's from Joshua. He says, "Why are there no half races? I understand some might not like the Scar, some might not be able to do it like the Scar. That makes sense, but there should be others that are able to."
All right,
man,
you go. All right, you can go first, but I have the answer.
Okay, well, you have the answer. You go. I'll tease you. I totally agree with this. Think about the history, right? The races, they've been around forever. They've been working together, in some capacity. So why you'd think there would be half elves, you'd think there'd be half ogres, even like half Archive running around, right? The elves and the humans are super tight. You can't tell me that the strife they've endured together wasn't some sort of trauma kinship happening. I mean, as if. what about those sanctums, right? They're all cooped up in there and, sort of waiting out the deicide war in these sanctums. You didn't going to tell me that no dwarves in Archive found a way to pass the time. I mean, they might be from different planets. I get that. But we've seen models. We know they have the features, if you catch my drift, like we know what they can do. So maybe not the gnomes. I'll give them why there's no half gnomes, because there's something different. But yeah, like where's the half races, man? So what's your answer?
There's no half races, because if there's half races, it has to include everybody, and a Scar gnome mix is too terrifying for anybody to be able to handle. So that is exactly why there's no half races. Blame the Scar gnomes.
Scar gnomes. Oh man. That's so good. Yeah. I want there to be a Scar gnome.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for sticking with us for a very long episode of The Rewind. It's our longest to date, but only by about 7 minutes, believe it or not. About an hour 20. But thank you for sticking with The Rewind today. We promise we'll try to keep it closer to an hour on average, but really important topic today. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that the chat is alive and you guys are giving your own opinions on this, because this is a huge step forward for Pantheon. It's a huge step forward for communication, and it's clearing up a lot of the past that I think we needed to hear. So as always, thank you for checking us out, whether live on YouTube, on Spotify, on iTunes, wherever you like to consume this show. You guys just helped us recently get to 2,000 downloads of the podcast by itself, not including YouTube. So thank you so much for that. And we hope that you'll continue to come support us. We appreciate every single person who does. So thank you guys for that. And we will see you next week.
Cheers, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube under the name Pantheon Plus. Also, be sure to follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter. Keep up to date on all Pantheon Rise of the Fallen information on www.pantheon.plus, the definitive source for all media of Pantheon. Until next time.